Oh, no, you're good.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna start now. Hello, my name is Kate, and I did TBB, in case you didn't know, and this is my final project. So today, I'm going to tell you a story, but I'm going to tell the story four different ways through four very different people's perspectives, and each person comes from is a unique person with their own history, motivations, beliefs, and ideologies. It's the same story, just four different times. The first one I'm going to tell you is a story of a volunteer. She went on a 3-week trip to a small country named Bafa Bafa, which is not real, and this is her story. I never thought I would do this. It just seemed too scary for me to hop on a plane and go somewhere completely new, somewhere completely abroad, and just be there. A bunch of my friends had did service trips abroad and were constantly raving about how it changed their life and how they had a whole new perspective on the world, and I wanted that. So I pushed aside all my fears and doubts and signed up for a 3-week trip to an orphanage in Bafa Bafa. As I arrived, I knew instantly that this would be a life-changing experience. There were about 20 students in my group, and we had 3 leaders. We stayed in volunteer houses right in the heart of the orphanage, which was really great because we got to spend time with the kids all the time. We lived right by them. And really, this was the best part. Even though most of the kids didn't have a lot of possessions, they all seemed very happy and willing to play. And oh boy, we played all the time. Before coming to Bafa Bafa, I had collected soccer balls and footballs as donations, and the kids just absolutely loved them. So in Bafa Bafa, they speak the language Kems. Now, my Chem skills aren't so great. I've taken a few classes in high school, so I had to rely a lot on like hand signals and translators to get my point across. One day, we were trying to explain the game of freeze tag to the kids, and it took almost a full hour to explain it. But once the kids finally understood, we had a great game. I made a really strong connection with one girl in particular. Her name was Sasha, and she was around my age. Even though we came from completely different cultures, we both enjoyed doing girly things like painting our nails and braiding hair. She spoke basic English, but she was always talking of how she wanted to go to school. So ever since coming home, I've been determined to continue this connection, and right now I'm in the process of raising funds for her to attend high school in a nearby city. Look up my GoFundMe. Anyways, it wasn't all just games and braiding hair. My team and I also completed a small construction project for the orphanage. We built a small library. It was hard, backbreaking work for sure. Every morning we had to get up at 7 a.m., have a quick breakfast with the kids, and then worked all morning till lunch. I've never actually constructed something before, hard to believe, I know, and it took me a few days to pick up the act of mixing cement and placing bricks. But I think at the end, I finally got the hang of it. We also taught English in the small school. Now, I've never taught English before either, but I felt much more qualified for this job than for constructing a whole library, considering I actually speak English, you know. How the school schedule goes is they have simple math in the morning, along with chems, and then after lunch is English. So we would help out only for the English part. It would have been pretty hard to explain chems, considering we don't speak chems. We split up into groups of 4, and each of us took a classroom. My students were about 8 years old, and my heart just about broke when I saw that they didn't even have desks. There was only a small rug, and they only sat on that. And I couldn't even imagine trying to learn without even having a chair to sit on. So for our lessons, we usually just went over simple vocabulary words. We would write up words like cat, apple, cow, etc. on the chalkboard, and then draw a picture next to it as a way of explanation. Then the kids would practice saying the word over and over until they felt like they got it. Sometimes the original teacher would help to explain the words in the kids' native language, but most of the time she sat in the back taking study notes. It felt weird to be a sort of actual teacher when I myself was still a student in high school, but it was also quite a learning experience. Get it? Because I was in school. My time in Bafa Bafa was truly one of the hardest things I've ever done. It was shocking to see what kind of conditions the kids lived in. No desks, no running water, eating rice for every meal. But it was also inspiring to see that in spite of all of this, all that they didn't have, the kids still had smiles and didn't spend all day being sad they were poor. I have definitely come back as a changed person. I don't take for granted my hot shower or my electricity or have 5 more or the fact that I have tons of clothes. I also realize that there is much more important things in the world than just being homecoming queen. There's also things like friendship and community and helping others. Now, I stand for all of you today to say that you don't need to be a doctor or some highly qualified developmental theorist to have an experience like mine. I mean, I certainly wasn't. To make a true development difference, in the lives of others, all you really need is a smile, a willing spirit to learn, and a desire to help out the less fortunate. Now we're going to hear from a teacher in the local school. For the past 10 years, I've worked as a school teacher in an orphanage. I teach math, chems, and English. My husband and I also live with the kids and serve as foster parents for them. It was about 2 years ago when we first started getting volunteers. We were all really excited for our first round of foreigners and spent weeks preparing for their arrival. We built them nice little huts in the middle of the orphanage with funds from the organization. Lots of kids worked extra hard in their English so they could communicate with the foreigners. How it went was they would come for a few days and play with the kids, teach them a new game or so, and give them some balls. It was nice to be able to practice my English with them and to see the kids so happy. And the orphanage would get a small stipend for having hosted the volunteers, so I had no complaints. At first, the kids were often heartbroken that their newfound friends were always leaving after a week and then eventually stopped trying to make connections at all. Most of them caught on quickly that what were the best ways to get toys or candy from the volunteers, and eventually gave up any desire to form friendships, but instead saw the volunteers as ways to get free stuff. And then recently the organization told us that they were going to start having the volunteers stay for longer periods of time and to get them involved in more community work. I did not know what this meant and was under the impression that they would simply be playing with our kids, but for a much longer time. It wasn't until they arrived that I realized that they were going to be teaching in our schools, building a library, and also playing with our children. I was initially excited about a library and having actual English features in my school. I watched every morning as they got up and attempted to learn how to make cement and the basics of building a structure. Most of them could not grasp what was being taught and had to start over multiple times, not knowing they were using up precious resources. Then in the afternoon, they came into my classroom to teach English. They asked me a few questions and wanted to know my teaching style and what they should go over. But I did not know how to explain myself. The visitors had so many questions and they talked so fast for me to really understand. Even though I was the English teacher, I did not have the ability to express myself fully in this foreign language, and there was no available translator to help me out. I simply sat down in the back and allowed the visitors full reign in the classroom, too embarrassed to attempt to teach. Besides, why would my students actually want to listen to me when here were the shiny new foreigners who spoke perfect English? I watched as the volunteers went over basic vocabulary words and drew pictures next to the words as a way of explanation. I could see my students were confused at the drawings and what they were supposed to do with them. I had never drawn anything on the board before. Most students just copied the words down and stared straight ahead. We had already gone over these words months ago and had moved on to forming basic sentences. But I had no way to explain that, and besides, these were the English speakers, and they were the experts. Who was I to correct their teaching? That's how it went every day while the foreigners were in our home. Most of them never got the hang of construction, so my husband and several other of the elder boys had to give up some time from their own jobs to fix their mistakes. This was done in the late evening so none of the volunteers would see. The organization had made it very clear to us that they wanted the foreigners to feel like they were doing something good, so we just fixed their mistakes in the dark. When the foreigners finally left, I was relieved to gain back control of my classroom, but I could see that my students were confused as to why we were going over simple sentences again instead of vocabulary words like the visitors had done. Some complained that they didn't like my teaching and wanted the foreigners to come back. I felt that by handing my classroom over to the strangers, I had lost the respect and connection I had formed with my students. The library remained mostly empty as we didn't have the books or funds to fill it, and it stood as a reminder to all that we had lost. Some good did come out of their stay. One older girl at the orphanage made a connection with a volunteer, and now that volunteer is raising money for the girl to go to high school nearby. Other volunteers continue to send us donations, which help supply school programs and pay for meals. I used to love having the foreigners come stay with us. It provided me with chances to get to know culture so different from my own, and it gave the kids new opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise. But when I look at how my husband worked hard to fix their mistakes, or how my students no longer respected my authority as a teacher, I often question whether it's all worth it in the end. And then we have another story from someone in the orphanage. I was 13 the first time I met someone who wasn't from Bafa Bafa. I remember being confused at how they didn't speak Kemps or how they didn't know any of our games. It took me a few days to warm up to these people who spoke a strange language, who dressed weird and ate strange food. I was too shy to really play with them like so many other of my friends did. Just when I thought about talking to one, They were gone, only replaced by a new set of volunteers the next week. That's how it went for a while. Some of my friends still enjoyed playing with the foreigners and practicing their English with them, but most were only interested in the free stuff the visitors always handed out. I never took much interest in them, though. I had no desire for their shiny gifts or forming friendships that would only last a few days. I focused my energy instead on school and doing the best I could there. When I was 15, a whole new set of volunteers came. One of the foster parents told me that these people were going to be here for a much longer time and that they would be doing jobs around the orphanage. Even though I knew they'd be helping out in the schools, I was still taken aback by the sight of an American in place of my regular English teacher. I looked around for my old teacher and couldn't find her in the class at all. Apparently, the foreigners were my new teacher. I just sat and watched as they stumbled through a lesson. They didn't really know how to explain any of the words and often resorted to acting them out like it was a silly game. I want to say that we knew what jump meant, but I never corrected my teacher or even raised my hand in that classroom before. One of the volunteers was always following me around. They asking if I wanted to paint nails with her or play a game. This had happened before with some of the other visitors. I was one of the oldest girls in the orphanage, and the girl volunteers always wanted to play with my long hair or help me with makeup. Usually I just ignored them. But I gave a chance with this girl. Her name was Sarah, and unlike most of the other volunteers, she actually seemed to care. She asked me so many questions about school, about what I wanted to do in my life, if I ever had a boyfriend, who my best friend was. My English isn't great, but I tried my best to describe my life to her. I told her how I hoped to go to high school one day and maybe even university. I told her how I was one of the best students in the area, but the orphanage didn't have the funds to get me more schooling, so I was stuck in a class with people 3 years my junior. Before Sarah left, she had promised she would help me to get more school. I just nodded and smiled, knowing better than to believe the promises of a foreigner. But then 2 months later, one of the foster parents approached me and said that the past volunteer had raised enough money for me to go to high school. I knew it was Sarah. I was shocked that she remembered me, but also was beyond excited to be able to chase my dream of going to school. Suddenly, the world seemed more open to me, full of opportunities and chances to achieve something. But as I began school, I faced a whole new set of challenges. Now every test I took, every homework assignment, every grade was now no longer just a reflection of my intelligence, but also a reflection of how grateful I was for a foreigner's donation. There was extra pressure to study, to do well, to achieve great things. Also, I was worried that one day my American friend would forget about me, about the money, about my future. Every day I went to school, I was worried I'd be turned away, that the money had run out, that Sarah had moved on to another charity case. Before I'd seen my education as a way to open more doors for me, but now I only felt trapped by it, trapped by the pressure to succeed by proving that Sarah's donation was worth it in the end. And then trapped because my whole future depended on the kindness of someone who I'd only known for a few short weeks. Then we have one more story. We began our work in Bafa Bafa about 5 years ago. We originally did conservation projects and helped the locals with protecting our natural resources. We sent teams of environmental scientists and the occasional college student to help out, but these were costly programs and we eventually had to wean off. Then we got wind of the orphanage tourism industry, of how organizations just like us were making a nice profit by sending high schoolers down to orphanages for about a week, and we made a partnership with an orphanage in Bafa Bafa and started our own programs. They went along great. For about 2 years, the volunteers would go down for a short time, play with the children, get a new Facebook profile picture, and a nice resume filler for college. Our feedback from these programs said the students wanted to do more. They felt that a week wasn't long enough and they wanted more time. So we designed a longer program, one that had plenty more activities than just playing with the kids so the volunteers could feel more involved. The program included things like building a library and teaching English and staying for a longer term. And lo and behold, spots filled up quickly. And the feedback from the volunteers was great. They felt like they were actually making a difference and how they felt like agents of change and how they hope they can come back next year. Of course, what the volunteers don't know is that the library they built is essentially useless without books to fill it and that there's no extra funds to build said books. Now, we aren't the bad guys here. We're simply running a business, and our business involves taking Americans and the occasional European and placing them in less developed areas so they can make a difference. Of course, what most of these teenagers don't understand is that it takes longer than a 3-week project to really make a difference. That takes months upon years of hard work and immersing oneself in the community and learning the language and the culture. But most teenagers are hardly willing to give up 2 weeks of their summer, much less years of their lives. They're willing to help out as long as it doesn't interfere with their schedule. And we provide them with these opportunities. We provide programs with them, have the local partners pamper them, tell them they really made an impact, all hoping that these teenagers will go back home and tell their friends to sign up. And the volunteer industry has become a whole new monster. Instead of only skilled individuals being qualified to go out in a field, now any adolescent with a few grand to spare is able to go live in some village in Ghana and save the world. It may sound like an oxymoron that volunteering has become a business, but that is the reality. Now, this is only one situation, and it's all fictional, but it is based after real-life events that happen again and again. I did extensive research and read countless blogs of people who had gone abroad and changed the world. I also read stories of people who were just like me and were reconsidering this whole volunteering thing. But I wanted to address more than just the issue of voluntourism, which is a tourist who also does volunteer work, in case you're not familiar with that lingo. I wanted to bring attention to the problem of a single story of volunteering. With a single story, we hear only of the great work, not the oppression of the local people, not the system of modern colonialism that has been built around volunteerism. And I feel also that by only hearing one side of the story, we omit the local people completely. We erase their hard work and replace it with the good deeds of foreigners. We idolize those who sacrifice time and money to build a house for an orphanage and completely forget the people who live there. Let us not forget the Sacho tribe in Ecuador, of the elders who have to slowly watch their culture fade away. Nor can we omit the stories of the rice farmers in Thailand who bring food to millions of people but are losing their workforce to the lure of the big city. By telling a single story, we ignore the pain of being a woman in India or caring for HIV patients in South Africa. I don't have all the answers. I don't know if volunteering does more harm than good, nor do I even have the qualifications to be making these statements. But I do know that all the great heroes I met all over the world deserve recognition and deserve to have their story told as well. Are there any questions? No? Yes, Leo.
What was that last story told by?
It was told by like the organization that sets up volunteering programs. Kind of like a TBB, but not really. Any other? Yes.
Did you end up interacting much with the local organizations that you were working with?
Yeah, we spent like a lot of time with like our partner organizations, and some countries more than other. Like in India, we might have spent too much time with them, but in like South Africa, we spent a lot of time with Flood Aid. But not so, like in Ecuador, we didn't really talk to our host organization, but it really varied.
And did you feel that they were honest with you about their full opinion about having you guys there as
India, I felt like it was definitely like, they're like, you're here, you're gonna change the world. You guys are amazing. And then like, generally like they kind of were like, yes, you guys are like great for doing this, but I feel like they were kind of honest, but not like really honest with us. Like I felt most of them were like, yes, you guys are doing a great job here, but I feel like none of them want to be like, you're not really doing that much.
Where do you think on the spectrum of volunteerism versus actual social impact Yana Puma are like organizations?
Well, I didn't really understand what Yana Puma did, and from what I've seen in Bua, I felt like they had such a like conflicted view about Yana Puma, like especially my host dad. He was like, we don't really like Yana Puma here. So I feel like it wasn't really voluntourism, more as the fact that like they just didn't like the organization itself and the work they were doing. So I feel like they felt like Yana Puma wasn't really respecting their culture and was trying to make them do all these projects to like modernize them, and they didn't really want that.
Would you change anything about the program, like in any way?
I would erase us teaching totally. I feel like we are definitely not qualified to be teachers in India or teachers at all. And like that was just like the biggest problem I had, because I feel like most of the other work we did was like very observational and like learning from the local people. But like in India, it was like us stepping in and taking like the local people's jobs. So I would fix that TBB.
So do you think
Did you have an impact on the people more than they had an impact on you, or the other way around?
I don't know what kind of impact I had on them, but like I know I've been impacted by them, especially like hearing like their stories. That's like what really impacted me the most. Like their work was all amazing, like especially like in plant aid, like seeing the caregivers was really great, but like really it's like their stories, like listening to my host dad talk about like apartheid, and then like my host dad in Ecuador talk about like how like the Sacho people are like losing their language and all that. That's what really impacted me, and I don't know if my stories of being like an American impacted them as much, but I don't really know what kind of impact I left on them. But I know they've impacted me a lot, and I'll carry like their stories for a long time.
So the situation that you found yourself facing in India, do you think that the folks in that place needed outside help? You were just providing the wrong kind, or do you think that they just needed outsiders to sort of stay out of the way?
Well, the situation in India, I felt like was kind of created, like so like volunteers could like come in. Like our organization IDEX was like our organization that just took like foreigners and like placed them in like schools to like teach. And like I feel like if IDEX didn't really need to do that, like my school like that I taught in, I feel like could have been totally self-sustaining if I never came in there, because I was actually their first like round of volunteers, and school's been around for like a couple of years, and they seem to be doing not a great job, but like a decent job right now. So like I feel like we kind of should just like let India do India, because India is such like a different culture than my own, and like I didn't know their teaching style or like how they learned. And I feel like going there and like imposing like my teaching style on them was like just kind of messing with things even more. So they should like we should help them, but in those like in the shadows, kind of. Any other questions?
So I was just thinking as you were presenting the different stories, and I was thinking about what it means to volunteer. And there's so many agencies that we work with in other countries. There's so many out there, and of course some have better intentions than others, and some of them are business oriented.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, going forward, if you were to, or if I were, or anybody else who would go overseas to volunteer with an agency, what would be some of the things that you would look for that you think would actually benefit your time there, or is it really a waste of time?
It's not a waste of time. Like I'm never not gonna go abroad with the intention of volunteering, but like I think like now I'm gonna look more like critically on like their mission statements and like looking through and like their like what their projects entail, and if it's like you will go in and like teach these people how to speak English, and I'd be like, well, I don't really know if like they want me doing that, or if it's like you will learn like how, or if it's just more like an observational kind of thing, and like you learn like how like a clinic works in South Africa, and you're like, well, that seems like I'm not really stepping in and taking someone's job. That seems more like me learning from the local people. Than I think it's just more of like looking at like the agency, being like more critical, being like, is this just here for like me to get an experience, or is this here for like it to be like a cross-cultural communication and like exchange of like ideas and like me helping the local people instead of being like, I'm a foreigner, I know more than you. So I don't know. But also I think like going ahead, I'm gonna think like more of like I should volunteer locally, because I think that's where I can do like the most good, because I understand where I'm from, and like I can be there for a long time instead of just like a month or a couple of weeks. So yeah.
It's more of a comment. I really like to hear four different perspectives and how you told a complete picture with that.
Yeah, so it's just like, especially like on social media, like even like I would see like social media is such a big part of like our gap year with like our little blogs and like Instagram and like all that, and people would be like, oh, you're so inspiring, like you're changing the world, and it's just like we're telling like one side of the story, and it's just like we don't know really what's happening, and like if we are really changing the world. And it's just like by telling like our side, I feel like people are being like we were becoming like idolized by people for like doing all this, but really like we shouldn't. So I don't know, that was just something that like I really took away from this gap year, and I'm gonna like really work on like my future. Yes.
Are you familiar with the Native American medicine wheel?
No.
That's what you use.
Oh.
You know, you walk the wheel from the different directions, and you look at the situation from the east to north to south to west.
I did not know that was a thing.
So that's where you come.
Yeah. Any other comments, questions, fears? Okay, thank you.